Another thing I know that I like to do for myself is when, I go into a setting or it may be complicated or confusing or it's contentious in some ways, to remember what my purpose is in the time I want to spend there. I think of being around my grandchildren, for instance, and remembering that generally one of my visions in being with them is to bless them and encourage them every time I'm with them. Mm-hmm. So if I take the focus off whatever else is going around me or for me, whatever's hard, and stay focused on the gift I want to give to somebody when I go in there, it really helps me to be able to do that, as you say, put the rest of it on the back burner, bring into it what will make that a meaningful time for me. And inevitably it does. If I can go away and say, wow, I had a really great 10-minute conversation. It was short, and yet it just felt really meaningful to me that I could talk with this person in that way.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We're here with you today with Dr. Greg Miller, our host, and special guest today, Debbie Laaser, the co-founder of Faithful and True and our director here. Debbie is a licensed family and marriage therapist and has joined us today to talk about the subject of traditions.
Traditions.
And it makes sense. We sit here and it's December. It's 7 degrees outside in Minneapolis. And so we're getting ready for the holidays. And I think it's just helpful for us to acknowledge that for many people, the holidays, or maybe most people, the holidays are very complex. And for a lot of families, there are traditions that they try to maintain. There are traditions that have been lost. And traditions do have meaning. So maybe let's just start by talking about what is a tradition and why they are important to us.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I've been kind of focusing on this topic a lot lately because of a couple of shows I've been watching. One is The Great Light Fight. Is that how it's, is that the title of it? The Great Light Fight on TV. And they go around and they look at several families and how they're building their front yards with all kinds of Christmas lights.
Yes.
And then they tell 4 stories, visit 4 families, and then they make a decision and award $50,000 to the winner.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And these are very elaborate, traditional lighting ceremonies at these houses. But what is interesting is almost every time I watch this, the families start by saying, well, I put up my first string of lights about 30 years ago or so, and every year we added to it, and we've done it every year since, and it's grown to be this. So that seems like a tradition, that they've grown. They've experienced a lot of passion. They know exactly what they're going to do every year. They know this has got to get put together and put up. Everybody enjoys it. And so it goes on every year. And they remember these stories when people have passed and the next generation is taking over. That's what seems like as a tradition.
So maybe a tradition is an experience, a response, a behavior that we have regularly that in some way connects us to the past. So if we just do it once, it may not be a tradition, even though it connects us to the past. So it's an ongoing pattern of connection, and it also connects us to the past of doing that tradition, but also maybe even beyond that. One of the things I just find fascinating about Christmas is it's almost like a portal to our past, whoever we are, however old we are. And I often say I can be sitting in my car in 2021 listening to the radio, and a song will play that I heard driving to my grandparents' house back in the 60s. And so immediately we're transported back in time because there's this experience I had in the car when I was growing up that I can have now that connects me to the past. And I think one of the things that complicates it is if some of those memories are difficult and painful. And so, yes, we're connected to the past, but it's not really a great memory that we would have, or maybe even a painful memory that we would have. Or sometimes what happens is the people that we shared that experience with are no longer with us. And so, yes, at the time it was a great memory, but now that person is gone, and what I'm reminded of is their absence. And so sometimes the traditions that move us to the past can be difficult and painful because what's missing now or what we experienced back then.
I notice also that as I talk with people, especially women, because that's mostly who I spend my time with, that the traditions they're trying to continue in their families or with loved ones today are getting so complicated because I suppose they keep growing. You know, someone has another idea, they add another tradition to whatever, that the expectations of fulfilling all of these traditions almost becomes a burden rather than a joy.
Right.
Trying to measure up to those traditions.
Right.
Or just
And
keep 'em
even
going.
to find the energy and the time and the money to do those year after year. And I think they start losing maybe what we originally had hoped from traditions is that connection with people. And now it's serving as an exhaustion piece in our life and something that I think we need to be mindful of, whether it's really serving us with the vision that we wanted it to originally.
Well, it's kind of like, and I shouldn't use this example because I don't know much about gardening, but it's kind of like
But your analogies are too good not to.
if you have too many plants in your garden, then what ends up happening is they begin to maybe suffocate's not the right word, but impede the growth. And so every once in a while you have to go in and kind of clean it out and pull out so that you can prioritize the plants that you really want to thrive. So maybe every once in a while you have to go in and look at the traditions the family has and says, okay, these are the priorities, these are the ones we want to focus on, and we may need to just set these aside. They were good, they served us while we had them, but realistically they're no longer possible. I think that another thing that shifts is as families change and age. You know, when your kids are young, everybody's at home, you can develop traditions, but then as they age and they get married and they move out, not everybody's there. And so even maybe redefining or interpreting traditions based upon who is available and what's happening in that moment.
I think that's so true, Greg. I remember when Mark and I became empty nesters, our kids were all in their significant relationships, and eventually, you know, they got married. We were dealing with the fact that no Christmas or Thanksgiving or any holiday for that matter ever looked the same again.
Right.
We couldn't all depend that everybody'd be home on
Right.
Christmas or we go to grandma's on Christmas Eve or whatever. And at first that was really hard and almost seemed really sad and almost depressive. And as we started thinking about it, if we didn't choose to change some of these traditions, we could have lived with a lot of sadness and just feeling lost and like it was never the same as it was before and it wasn't going to be as fun or good or whatever meaningful. And so that was kind of our invitation to start changing traditions.
Right.
And to appreciate the new things that were coming along. And I think to learn how to be a little more spontaneous, that's one thing I notice about traditions. It can keep us stuck a bit on
Right.
doing everything the same way so that we miss out on the opportunity of something that's new and exciting.
Well, kind of the term I thought of as you were talking was flexibility. That you're right, the tradition is something that is established, but in that there needs to be a flexibility that accommodates our current circumstances. And we had a similar situation last year where our boys were not going to be with us for actual Christmas Day. And so we identified another day that was our Christmas. It was not the 25th. And what surprised me was how meaningful it was because all of the components were there except the calendar, but every other component was there. The right people were there. The right experiences were there. We incorporated traditions that we had had since the boys were born. And so we needed, and I needed, to be open and flexible to this new thing that was evolving because it was just as meaningful because we chose this is what the experience is going to be.
Yeah.
So that flexibility piece, I think, is really important in moving forward with the traditions.
Do you ever have tradition shame? I mean, I don't know. I think that comes from me when I watch a little too much Hallmark
Yes,
movie stuff,
yes.
you know?
We currently have 22 Hallmark Christmas movies on the DVR.
That is part of your tradition.
Yeah, that's right.
part. Well, I have
Tradition /
adapted to it
addiction.
because it's my wife Cindy's. She is a nut about that. She has the T-shirt that says, "This is my Hallmark Christmas movie watching T-shirt."
Yeah.
You know, a friend of hers gave that to her. But those traditions are true. I was struck by your first comment about this, Greg, because I think Christmas music is really a trigger of a variety of sorts. It brings you back to your childhood, brings you back to what that song meant to you or to your family. Is that the song that you all sang in the car if you did have a Christmas trip to Grandma's house? And so it's that time of year that we're being... I'm sometimes annoyed by how early the radio stations start to play the Christmas music. Like, I think October's a little early to start playing it, but once it starts, when the timing is right, it feels good because it gives us warm thoughts of family and tradition.
Well, and I do think, back to the idea of Christmas tradition shame, sometimes we can have that fear that we're not doing enough.
Exactly.
And
That's what mine is.
we had an interesting conversation with our boys one time because, Beth and I were kind of having that, did we do enough? Do we have enough traditions? And so we asked our boys, what do you think our traditions are? And we were pleasantly surprised that the things that were important to them, the things that they identified and named, and for those of you that are struggling, kind of what are our traditions, if your children are old enough, ask them, what do you see our traditions are? And you may be surprised by the number of things that are important to them that maybe for you were just casually doing, and then you started doing it repetitively, but it became important to them.
I love that idea. I was just going to mention that too, Greg, that it is one of the ways I've worked myself out of this shameful place is to ask the kids what is important to them, and I'm so surprised by what they say. Like something I fell into when they were young was getting them new pajamas that they got on Christmas Eve.
Right.
And they look forward to that.
The main reason was so they would look decent in the movies. I forgot to tell them that, but it was true.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing they really remember.
Right.
And so, and I notice they're doing it for their loved ones, and but it's interesting. I think to keep remembering the vision of why we do what we do is a very important thing in deciding whether there are some traditions that maybe are outdated now or they're taking us in the wrong direction. One of those for me is cookie baking. And, speaking of at some point we'll talk about brain health here. But I've just learned that I don't want to focus that much on sugar in my life because I know it's not good for me. To spend hours and hours baking and then having to resist all of that just doesn't make sense to me. So it's a tradition I've really let go of, except for maybe one or two favorite recipes of the family. And at first, I had a hard time with that. Everyone's baking and sharing cookies and whatever, and it's okay because I've decided that isn't part of my vision, and I want to spend my time doing other things that are maybe more meaningful.
Well, and you mentioned this, just the cost. And sometimes what we have to do as a wise adult is just be realistic about what the budget is and say no to things which actually maybe the new tradition is we're going to live within our means. That we are going to set a budget, we are going to stay within that. And what that means is there are some things that we won't be able to do, and we may have to grieve the loss of those. But to have the Christmas tradition of anxiety about money in January really isn't serving anyone. And so part of it is just engaging this greater sense of value. What are our values? What do we value? And then how can we invest in that? I do want to acknowledge, because of typically our audience, we have people that are in difficult places in their relationships right now. Couples that are really struggling, and we're coming into the holiday season. Is there some encouragement or support that you offer to wives that would say, I'm not in a good place in my marriage and I don't even know how to engage Christmas from this place?
Well, I would just encourage them to let that be. It's part of the grieving process to know that we'll take some detours from some of the usual things that we will do, and that's okay. And maybe in the detour, they will even run across something different that gives them joy and passion and meaning for the season, whether it's having it be a quieter time. I love Amy Grant's song about Christmas, all I want is a silent night. And I think sometimes we forget that when we're in hard times, we may be led to some of those things that are actually going to be very meaningful and will change some of our traditions as we move forward.
Right.
So I think just embracing that, and I think this learning to be spontaneous with whatever is, sometimes too in my own life when things haven't worked out to be with family or people can't be home, being spontaneous and just kind of allowing what might happen has led to some of the most fun and connection that I never could have imagined or planned for. And so I think that can be important too, to just be okay with what it is.
One thing I would also say is sometimes couples feel obligated to pretend. You know, everybody's together for Christmas, we need to pretend that things are better. And actually, I would use different language, and it's, can we temporarily set aside some of the chaos and the dynamics, not pretending things are better, and for this moment, not focusing on that. You know, part of our couples workshop is we send them out for a time of having fun. And one of the things that we clearly say is by choosing to have fun in this community tonight is not to deny that there's still difficulty and pain. And so can a couple decide we're going to, for this experience, for this holiday, we're going to set aside temporarily a focus on some of the difficulty and engage what can be good and positive about our current situation.
And I think, as you often say, Greg, know our limitations to how long we can do that too. You know, it could be if we normally spend a whole weekend with family, we can maybe do it for 2 hours, and you know that might be all that we can do, and that can be okay for this year or this season when we're working through something hard.
Right. And maybe even to say, for this season, I'm not able to go and spend any time in that family dynamic. And so at least for this holiday, I need to name my limit, which is if you're going to go see your family, that's great, and I may not go with you. Because what we know is as couples are navigating recovery and kind of getting into the truth, it doesn't just impact their nuclear family, their specific family, but sometimes the dynamics in the extended family become complicated also. And it may be important just to recognize that that's a limit that somebody will need to make.
Another thing I know that I like to do for myself is when, I go into a setting or it may be complicated or confusing or it's contentious in some ways, to remember what my purpose is in the time I want to spend there. I think of being around my grandchildren, for instance, and remembering that generally one of my visions in being with them is to bless them and encourage them every time I'm with them. So if I take the focus off whatever else is going around me or for me, whatever's hard, and stay focused on the gift I want to give to somebody when I go in there, it really helps me to be able to do that, as you say, put the rest of it on the back burner, bring into it what will make that a meaningful time for me. And inevitably it does. If I can go away and say, wow, I had a really great 10-minute conversation. It was short, and yet it just felt really meaningful to me that I could talk with this person in that way.
Well, it's a double blessing, too. It's a blessing of what you're giving them, of your personal time and care and affirmation, but you step back from it having totally enjoyed the experience. So it's like a double gift, a gift that goes both ways.
Yeah, it ends up being that way, for sure.
One other thing I think I would acknowledge is a lot of Christmas traditions don't necessarily have to do with our family. Beth and I are a part of a small group. We've been together for years. In a joking way, one time we called our gathering at Christmas the Festival of Lights. Don't even know where that came from. But now, all these years later, when our small group gets together, and we have a plan to get together in December, we're getting together for the Festival of Lights. And it's just a fun time for this community of people that really is meaningful and significant to be together and to celebrate Christmas. And so many people, through their recovery journey, actually start to develop significant and deep community with other couples and individuals in recovery. And you may start to develop, we actually have Christmas traditions that involve that community. I know here, we're here for the men's workshop in December, and on Saturday, we're going to gather at the Faithful and True Christmas party, which really for me is one of my favorite parts of the season. And you and Mark did a great job, and you do a great job of creating a fun, celebratory space where we can be together and just enjoy that connection in that community. And to me, it's an amazing gift that I can do something professionally with people that I have this great respect for and enjoy and have fun. And so even finding opportunities in a variety of my life where I can find, that now is a part of my Christmas tradition. So
Yes, yes.
thank you for all you
You're
do to make that
welcome.
happen.
Glad
When
it's
did you say
coming.
that is?
And know that it is meaningful. And
Yeah.
my guess is there are a lot of people listening that as they begin to expand, where are my Christmas traditions? Yes, many of them will be within the context of family, but some of them will actually be in their church community or in their small group or maybe even in their professional world.
Yeah. I realize that one of my new traditions, well, it's been growing through the years, is always making something for our traditional dinner. And so I start focusing on that way early in the year. I mean, I wonder what I'll make this year for everybody.
Well, just to let you know, part of our tradition is pulling out all the stuff that you've made and using it to decorate our house when we get ready for Christmas. And, part of our tradition is we pull things out and we talk about the history of it. And it is, that's from the staff party of this year. And that type of, so it is amazing how just the nature of it is we can start to integrate and weave these experiences, these traditions moving forward. And again, it's always to connect us to the past, and also to create a sense of a hopeful future, anticipating what may be next. And just finally, I think it's just important for us to acknowledge that sometimes the season is difficult because there has been a loss. And so some of you may be going into this Christmas season for the first time without this person. And what is true is grief can be a part of the Christmas tradition. I go to a church that really emphasizes Advent, and Advent is the time of despair before Christ comes. And in the history of the church, Advent wasn't lights and candles and celebration. It was a time of mourning and grief, remembering the state of the people prior to Jesus being born. And so grief is a natural part of the Advent Christmas celebration. And there's something in us that feels like we're failing if we're grieving in the holidays. But the reality is it's very theological and biblically based for there to be grief and celebration at Christmas.
Great way to stop here.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Well, Deb, thank you so much for again joining us on
You're
the
welcome.
podcast today. It's always a blessing for us to have you. And I believe this podcast is going to make an appearance before Christmas gets here this year. We've gotten in with the
That's
producer.
right. The scheduler.
The scheduler, for sure. But we want to be sure to wish all of you and your family a blessed Christmas this year. We thank you for joining us today and for watching this podcast. If you are struggling with issues out there that deal with uncontrollable behaviors in the realm of sexual addiction, we invite you to visit faithfulandtrue.com. Check out our workshops for men, for spouses, and for couples. We have many wonderful resources to offer you. Until we meet with you again, we wish you a Merry Christmas, and we hope that this coming week is a week that is just overflowing with blessings and great vision.